Well, let's get some more thoughts and insight on this now and cross live to international affairs commentator Marko Gasic. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme. A pleasure to see you. Can we take any positives from those talks between Lavrov and Truss in Moscow today?
Well, it's difficult to see what positives we can take from a visit, which was by its nature purely formal, designed to really, I think, on the part of the UK government to position Liz Truss as an antidote to weasel words from President Macron. In other words, to restore European leadership to the hawks in the situation. That seems to be the intention, because there was no serious negotiation, no serious discussion of issues. And Foreign Minister Lavrov made it very clear that he was hearing the same thing internally and externally. There was no private channel. There was nothing really positive to say about this, except for an agreement to have further talks, which one would hope would be in a better frame of mind than these have been. But one has no real reason to think that they would be.
Sergei Lavrov, commenting in the media conference, said he just feels like he's not being heard, like Russia's not being heard. How in line with the talks do you think the message from Boris Johnson, speaking in Brussels, was?
Well, I think everything is designed to be on message, and the on message is this is a crisis, a major crisis. We have to be strong. We are being strong. We are escalating our presence in Eastern Europe. But the whole idea of manufacturing a crisis, which this seems to be, is to allow for certain other measures and certain other intentions. We go back to previous situations where crises have been manufactured as excuses to attack those sovereign countries which the West now claims to be supporting in this particular instance. So really, it may be that the plan here is to try and provoke any kind of reaction from Russia, any kind of act of aggression, however small, as a basis by which you could lock Russia away in a well away from Europe, well away from Nord Stream 2, 3, or any other rational arrangement for European energy security, but one that would suit the US, which ultimately makes the decisions in Washington about all of this. I mean, this discussion about NATO really is about the US, because NATO is what its members are, and the US is its main member and its decision maker. So what the US decides, that's what's going to happen. So does the US have an interest in the Nord Stream 2 going ahead and a stable relationship between Russia and Germany and the EU? No, of course it doesn't. It wants those relationships to be poor, to break down, to be unstable, and it wants to sell weapons into that situation, and therefore it wants to provoke instability, as it's doing now with this talk of a crisis.
And it's such a confusing message, isn't it, that NATO's sending out to Moscow and indeed the rest of the world, when it's claiming it wants peaceful dialogue, and yet at the same time it's boosting its troops' presence near Russia. How hypocritical is that?
Well, I won't talk about Western hypocrisy. I mean, Iraq, Yugoslavia, Libya, Afghanistan, attacks from sovereign states, which the West is now claiming to be the biggest upholder of. It does beg a belief, really. But the important thing here is that Russia, let's look at what's going on here. Russia is not interested in Ukraine. Russia is interested in its own security. NATO isn't interested in Ukraine either. NATO wants Ukraine as a base to put its missiles, 5 minutes from Moscow. That's really what the ultimate achievement would be as far as NATO military planning is concerned. So that's what the stakes are, and Russia would be irresponsible to simply allow that to happen. So if this situation does generate into a real crisis, then those are the stakes, those are the issues.
Moscow, for its part, has been very consistent. It's claiming it does not plan to invade Ukraine, never has, and is actually worried about NATO's expansion. But, you know, NATO is unwilling to compromise. So what guarantees could Moscow get at this point?
I think that the key thing here is that it is a spat between NATO, or rather the US, hiding behind the NATO umbrella, NATO being the vehicle by which the US gives Europe orders, its marching orders if necessary. But the main thing is that Ukraine is simply the magician's illusion. Ukraine is the piggy in the middle of a geopolitical spat. And all this talk of Ukraine, its right to defend itself, it would not be in any danger were it not for the fact that NATO plans to implement its military strategy on Ukrainian territory. As I say, NATO had its nuclear missiles aimed at Ukraine only a few decades ago, and now it wants to aim its nuclear missiles from Ukraine. So I don't think the Ukrainians are under any illusions that they are the subject of Western affection. I mean, the West has brought them nothing but trouble, not just from the coup in 2013-14, but earlier in previous generations and eras. All the casualties the Ukraine has suffered historically have tended to come from the western part of the continent, not from the Russian side. Because, of course, for Russia, Ukraine historically was something very important in terms of its own culture. So it still has a strong emotional affinity towards Ukraine, but that doesn't mean it has an affinity in the sense that the West describes it as some kind of aggressive affinity. It's quite the opposite. The Russians want nothing more, Putin included, than to a peaceful, stable relationship with a peaceful, stable Ukraine on their door. And the way to do that is to de-escalate the situation on the edge of Ukraine in the Donbas area, de-escalate that, the Ukrainian military to withdraw, Russian military will then feel able to withdraw, then we can get no reasons for NATO missiles to be coming in, no reasons for NATO to be joined, and a stable buffer state between NATO and Russia and no further conflict. That's what would be a good plan.
Many thanks for joining us on the programme today. International Affairs commentator Marko Gasic, thank you.
Thank you.